Hi, and welcome to another episode of Casper on BI. Today, I'm very excited that we're going to talk to Brent Ozar. And everyone in the business intelligence industry, SQL Server industry knows Brent. He has an amazing skill for giving presentations, explaining how SQL Server works. But besides that, he has a very interesting story. And I have lots of questions for him. So with that, let's go to the episode. Hi, Brent. I'm
Hey!
really honored to have you here. Talk about SQL
Oh, I'm
Server.
I'm honored to be here, Casper. Thanks.
Yeah, usually we talk about BI and big data. Even though probably we're going to talk about some big data too here. But the core to every BI project and everything in BI is also still SQL Server.
Oh,
So
ta-da!
yeah, so that's why I thought it makes sense to talk about SQL Server. And besides that, you have an interesting story to on top of the SQL Server that I'd love to hear more about too.
You
And
bet.
we,
You
we,
bet.
we can kind of see it from your background too, where you are and how you're doing things. So that's pretty cool. So maybe a
Yes.
quick introduction. Who are you and what do you do for a living?
My name's Brent Ozar, and I try to make SQL Server go faster. Usually, companies will contact me when they're having emergency performance problems. So I try to turn those around in 2-3 days and like zero to hero kind of things. And when I'm not doing that, I teach people how to do it. So I want to make sure that if people can be proactive, that they can get ahead of the game and prevent these emergencies from happening. I kind of think of myself as like a teaching physician, but for
Mhm.
SQL Server.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
It's
so
fun.
so we know each other from the speaker circuit, all the sessions and the things. Fortunately, it's been a bit
The
quiet,
good old days.
the good old days, but I have my first session lined up in Copenhagen in September.
Oh,
So who
awesome. All
knows?
right, you've got to be looking forward to that.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
wanted to say is I've regularly snuck into your sessions, even though I don't follow SQL Server, because
Thanks.
I I love the way you present, and I learn from it every time. So
Thanks.
I mean, yeah, it's really there to learn some tips and tricks, and also I mean to kind of keep up with SQL Server. Before I joined
Mm,
Microsoft, a long time ago, I used to be an accidental DBA
mm,
and a SQL Server and all these. So I try to keep up, but it's hard enough to keep up with Power BI. So
yeah. Yeah.
so,
It's fun.
but
I go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say I have the same approach when I go to conferences now. Like a lot of the stuff that I always have to learn is before it's released, it's cutting edge kind of stuff. So it's not available at conferences. So instead, I just have a different role over at conferences. Now I want to go see other people and how they do what they do and learn from their communication styles. And plus, to refer students, like people who are trying to learn something, oh, here's someone you should go see speak because they're great and they convey it in interesting ways.
Yeah, that makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. So actually, I'm curious. I don't think I've ever heard the story. How did you get started speaking?
I think there's kind of two parts to it. One is how I got started training and privately, and then how I got started speaking publicly. Training privately, I worked in hotels. In hotels and restaurants, you're always teaching people who are coming up after you. You kind of think of it as when you're a hotel front desk clerk, you want to get in the night audit and then managing the front desk. If you're in the restaurant, you want to be a line cook, then you want to be the chef, then you want to manage the restaurant. I mean, they're continuous training
Mm,
churns. And a lot of people in hotels want to work somewhere else, like that they're only there for a short term anyway. So you're continuously on this training treadmill. So I was lucky enough to work under someone who taught me really early on, Thomas Eaton, who taught me really early on that he was going to teach me everything that he knew. He was a hotel manager, but my responsibility too is I had to take everybody beneath me and teach them on their journey very quickly, so that we could all rocket up the chain together.
ah,
I got out of hotels because I figured out eventually that you work every weekend, you work every holiday, every time that I wanted to be out partying. Of course, my friends are all out partying, and I'm working in hotels. It was a great party industry, but anyway, so I ended up getting out of that and getting into IT, where what do? You work every weekend, every holiday, and that didn't quite
yeah.
work out so well. But that really got me started on training. Then speaking publicly, when I shifted gears and I ended up going into IT, I went to a user group meeting in South Florida, and I had never thought of myself as ever the person who wants to present. I don't really like getting up in front of people. It's just not my bag. And I was sitting in a crowd of my first user group ever. We're thankful to be there because anybody who's sharing, I'm like, oh, that's great. Just anything to teach me and learn more. And there's so many people out there with no budget whatsoever, no training budget. They're trying to improve their own career. So they go to local user groups. They show up in things like Data Saturdays, SQL Saturdays Online, Data Weekend, or all these events. Um, I'm like, oh, if there are people who suck and they can do it, then I can get up there. It doesn't matter if I suck or not. At least I can give back to the community. And I sucked bad, in the beginning,
Hmm.
but I was comfortable with it because I'm like, who cares? It's just a bunch of us tech geeks getting together to show the stuff that we know.
I'm pretty sure you
Um,
did care, Brent, a bit.
I cared. I wanted to get better, but I'm like, oh, it's okay if I suck, and that's
Yeah.
still true today in our community. I'm like, there are so many people who are held back, thinking that they're not good enough. I'm like, oh, all of us are totally winging this. We barely know what we're doing technically, let alone speaking. The community is just so appreciative to get the free training and all. So that was really how I got started. And then I'm super competitive. And so once I got into it, I was like, okay, let's get good at this. How can I not suck? How can I be? It was very addictive when conferences started unveiling their feedback and like charting it. And I'm like, okay, so I want to be number one. What does it take to be number one? And then just work continuously at it from there.
So what did you do?
The biggest thing for me was watching stuff outside of our industry. Mythbusters, Alton Brown. I would look at
Uh,
people who were teaching, but not in a university, people who were teaching things that I wanted to watch for fun. Like Mythbusters made science fun for people. You didn't necessarily want to know what the volume of a sphere was, but Mythbusters would teach you interesting things along the way. And same thing with Alton Brown. I don't cook at all. Like I used to cook when I was in hotels and restaurants. I hate cooking, but I would watch every episode of Alton Brown because I'm like, this guy's incredibly entertaining. He can teach you all kinds of things. He uses jokes and life size models of things that make no sense. And I'm like, that's what I want. That's exactly what I want to be. I want to be someone who has a whole lot of fun with it, doesn't take it too seriously, and makes the audience laugh along the way. It's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to watch Mythbusters or Alton Brown. Some people want to see much more serious, disciplined approaches to science or
yeah.
cooking or whatever. But that was how I wanted to have fun with it. And then that way it's fun for two people. It's fun for me and it's fun for the audience.
Exactly. If you don't like it yourself and you feel uncomfortable, then
Mhm.
it doesn't work.
Yeah, I
But
wanted to do
I
things I
I
was proud
bet
of.
you probably still feel a bit like whenever you start, maybe you do it so much. Like I don't do it that
Mhm.
much, like actually presenting. But then every time I have a presentation, I still feel the heartbeat go up, and like I'm a bit
Oh
nervous about
yeah,
it. And
I hate speaking in front of people. I can't stand it. But it's one of those where now I feel like I have different clothes when I go to conferences. Like usually I'll put on different clothes, so I kind of think of it as this is my presenter uniform. I'm going to go now be the presenter. And just
yeah,
like I'm sure Alton Brown isn't that way in person. Some of the Mythbusters, they have to put on certain faces for cameras. They're kind of like actors. So I kind of think of myself as like an actor in that way. And the heart rate still goes through the roof, the nervousing, the fidgeting. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with my hands leading up to the thing. It's so awkward when people start filing into the room. I'm like, dee, dee, dee.
exactly.
I would love to have a green room. I would love to have some kind of room behind the stage where people can go get into the presentation audience, but then at the time when I'm supposed to start, I can walk out. You don't get that as a presenter. You got to stand there and kind of song and dance, and all that does happens is your heart rate goes up.
Oh yeah,
You lose control of your breathing and all that, and makes that first minute so much more awkward.
yes. So when did you start figuring out that the that teaching was really something that suit you well?
My dad, looking back, my dad loved goofing around. He ran a tire dealership for a really long time, worked for Goodyear, and he would do all kinds of goofy public things. Like he took a giant Cadillac, carved out the interior, filled it with fiberglass, and made it a pool. And he called it his carpool car. And he would drive it around in parades and stuff. He had no fear of uh, looking stupid or looking goofy because it would make people laugh. And so I always liked that. And I'm like, how can I work that into whatever it is that I do? He was very inspirational for that. And when I figured out that I could goof off at the same time I was teaching people stuff, like around when Mythbusters was catching on, Alton Brown was catching on, I was like, okay, if they're allowed to do that, if somehow they're allowed to make a living doing that, I want to make a living doing that. And I don't care if I suck. Just as long as I can do it and have fun with it. Heaven forbid I ever make money on it, because that seemed inconceivable at the time. But at least if I could just give user group presentations and make people smile and laugh. When they started paying for training classes, I was like, oh, oh, wait. Oh, I could actually do this for a living, and that was
Yeah.
when it really kicked on. Like the first time that I sold a pre-con class and people actually paid to attend, I just felt like a complete fraud. I still feel like a complete fraud, but at least I'm like, okay, now I'm used to it and I understand how that works. But that was the big aha moment when people hand you money in order to learn from you. I'm like, oh, whoa, okay, all right, I guess I could do this.
And then, so maybe another question that actually that took me quite a while to a little bit figure out, and I still don't really have it completely. The first time I started presenting, I was thinking, okay, this is a good session, But people came up with me
Mhm.
afterwards, like, oh my God, it's like level 500. How do you know how to level?
Oh, I think that is something that most presenters do wrong. I think that people build a presentation for someone they want to impress. It's almost like they're dating and they go, I want to give the kind of presentation that I would want to attend today. Nope. You want to give the kind of presentation that you would have attended 4 or 5 years ago, because the community, and it's really true for any product, the community is like a pyramid. There are tons of people at the beginner level, and there are progressively less and less people at expert levels. If you've been doing whatever you've been doing for 2, 3, 4 years, you're already midway up through the pyramid and you're looking up at the top going, that's the session I want to write. No, you want to write for the 10 times more people who are behind you, who are still trying to Google their way through figuring out whatever it is that you know how to do. So the thing that feels beneath you, the thing that feels too easy, that's the thing that you can nail down solid. And you feel like you want to call that a 100 level presentation, but it's just because whatever we know how to do seems 100 level. What what I really wish people would do is take a picture of themselves at their desk or go find one from every year and then look at a picture from yourself 3, 4, 5 years back and go, what was I working on then?
Yeah.
And what seemed hard to me then, it's probably level 200 or 300 out to the general public. And the stuff that you can't present on, that's level 400 or 500 to me. That's what it always feels like. But
Yeah. But I mean, some people do like it. Some people like to go to some sessions that are way above their head and like they get like see amazing stuff that will never happen. But I totally agree. I mean,
yeah,
it's also kind of the success probably from Guy in the Cube. These guys are
yes.
showing all the stuff that is really relatable for most people.
hmm
And
Yes.
Adam is
If you
really
want to
strict
build a
in
big
it.
viewership, yeah, no, yeah. If you want to build a big viewership, you don't do the 500 level sessions. You build, how does someone get their problem solved today who is just
Yeah.
stumbling, Googling their way through it, and it's massive. I like sitting through 500 level sessions too, like Bob Ward, Microsoft's Bob Ward.
Yes.
Whenever he opens up a debugger, I'm like, oh, cool. Let's go see how. Am I ever going to use a debugger? Nope. Do I understand half the things that are going on the stage? Nope. But it's an interesting entertainment kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's for the rest of us who don't get to present. I say the rest of us, I get to, like Bob, I get to present all the time now too. But for most of us who are in the audience who are thinking about, I want to present, don't do that. Present the thing that feels old hat to you, the thing that feels too junior, and your audience will be packed, will be just packed.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, so maybe let's time switch over to something else. So one of the other things that I really love about you and I read about you all the time is about like your transparency, like how you run the business, how you run your
Yeah,
life, and I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I just love it. I mean,
Thanks, thanks.
and yeah, and I've definitely picked up some things that I want to follow. Like for example, one of the things that I want to go do when Corona is over, like I have my kids 1 week, and 1 week I don't have my kids. You know how it
hmm
goes. In
hmm
that week that I don't have any kids, I can go travel wherever I want.
Oh yeah,
So it's definitely something
yes.
that I want to go do more. Like pack up
Yes.
my bag, pack up my
Yes.
laptop, and go work in Spain. I mean,
Yes.
so it
Oh,
is definitely
it's
a lot of things. Yeah, you have yearly goals, epic life quest.
mhm.
I love it.
It start
So
it started, I think, from my wife used to work for the airlines, and I used to work in hotels. So we basically had all kinds of access to free travel stuff. We had no money. I have so many funny stories of like not enough money to go out to a restaurant. We would have to buy things from a convenience store. We'd be like in great hotels in Rome or New York, but we couldn't even put together the money for a meal. Gradually we just loved doing that so much that as we switched into normal jobs, we're like, okay, we have to set aside so much of our income to make sure that we can go run around all over the world and have a really good time.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, maybe you can explain a little bit your epic life quest and your yearly goals. So, I mean,
Yes,
you're pretty. Yeah, go ahead.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, no, I said you're pretty meticulous about it. You know, you have all these goals
Yes.
that you set and you go for it, and I mean you strike off a lot of them too. I was actually going on your ozar.me website and was checking it out, and
Yes.
yeah, it's pretty cool.
Oh, I remember really clearly the first time I started doing it. I was sitting at a cafe, Books and Books, on Lincoln Road in Miami Beach. My wife and I lived in South Beach, Florida. So totally glamorous area, unbelievably beautiful, partiers, beaches, all kinds of stuff, nice cars. And I was working as a database administrator. I was driving a brand new Jeep, which was like my life quest, or my one big dream car at that time, being able to buy a brand new one. And working as a database administrator, something that just seemed unachievable to me before. And I was laying out, here are the goals that I want to have for retirement, the things that I want to finish on. And I was like looking back and I'm like, oh my God, I'm living this unbelievable life. South Beach, cruises, travel, and yet at the same time, it felt normal because all of us, when we look at our lives, we're like, oh, this was easy. But how you got to that point was Herculean. You had to do so much to get to,
Yeah,
like, from working at Microsoft, there's so many people who are like, oh my God, I wish I could work at Microsoft. The process of getting there is so incredible. It's so hard to get in. People look up to that and aspire to it. But once you're in, you're like, oh, okay, all right, yeah, well, sure. This is what I do. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Um, so I started writing down, like, these are the things that I'm really proud of, and these are the things that I want to be proud of over the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. And your life is kind of like an adventure. So Steve Cam wrote out this, here's what your level 50 looks like. And so I wrote out, here's what my level 50 character would look like. Here's the kinds of things I do on a daily basis. Then it was just a matter of building out a project plan and getting from here to there. Most of us, if we would go build an application, we would never just say, well, I'm going to build an app and then just start coding. You'd sketch
yeah,
out, here's what I want the app to do, here's what I want the screens to look like. But we do that with our career. We just get into a rut. We start cashing a check because it's easy and it's safe. And then next thing you know, you're old and you're trying to retire, and it's challenging. So I try to write out, here are the accomplishments that I want, and I have reminders to go in every 3 months and revisit that. Is this still what I want? What am I doing to make sure that I get to the next level of the stuff that I want? What's important to me? And it really helped me understand how much time most of us, myself included, dedicate to work instead of to our friends and family.
yeah,
It's real easy to look at your calendar and let the work grow and grow and grow until it's expanded to 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And you think, I have so much of the things that I need to do for work, but you don't realize you also have a huge list of things that you have to do for friends and family if you want a good work life balance. And then it's writing out those tasks. How can I make myself happy? How can I make my friends and family happy? How can I take care of my health? Things
relationships.
that are relationships, yeah. And if you don't do that, then you end up, everything else suffers in relation to work. And like, I don't want to be 60 and looking back on that and super frustrated.
Yeah, yeah, that makes total sense. Um, so you have all these goals, right? And
Mhm.
you've done already a lot. So, Kimi, maybe you can talk about a few, and maybe with the one that is the hardest one to achieve so far.
Oh, geez. The hardest one to achieve by far was, I said, and I remember sitting really clearly thinking about this at that cafe on Lincoln Road. I want my passive income to be equal to or greater than my active income. Meaning the amount of time that I have to sit in front of a keyboard and cash a check, working as a database administrator, working as a developer, whatever it is. I want the money that I earn while I'm sleeping, doing other things, to be equal to that or greater,
Yeah.
so that I can start to invest more time in building stuff that does passive income and spend less time in meetings, in front of a clock. And so it was easy to make that goal. I had zero passive income, none. And I'm like, okay, what would it take to make 150,000 a year in passive income, and then start working through that? And if you Google for it, you find all kinds of stuff around invest in real estate. I'm like, I'm not that good at that. I don't want to be a landlord. I don't want to, deal with people's problems with renting an apartment. I needed another way to do it. So it took years of work of just continuous, how do I blog and train and raise my brand and start to sell training classes, and then tune the shopping cart process for people buying the training courses. It took years for that to happen. And when it finally happened, it turned into a snowball. And now I make over $1 million a year on SQL Server training and conference type stuff, without having to be at a specific place at a specific time as much. I still have to be there to give training courses, but it's not as bad as working for clients at specific dates and times doing exactly what they want. That was by far the hardest one. The one that meant the most to me to finish was taking both of my parents are divorced, taking my dad on a vacation, my dad and my stepmom, and taking my mom on a vacation. And both of those were dream vacations that they never could have afforded. And that was just so incredibly fulfilling to say, come here, forget everything. Let's just pack our bags and go on
So
this
I saw
amazing
Mexico,
trip.
I think. Did I see Mexico?
Yeah. Yeah, did took my dad and stepmom to Mexico. The first one was I took dad and stepmom to Alaska, and
Oh, yeah.
my dad has been obsessed with Alaska. He's watches all the TV shows about it. And to be able to take them to Alaska was like, I struggled to keep a straight face and not bust out crying now, even as it was, because I know they never would have done that if I hadn't have said, come on, we're doing this. I'm taking care of everything. This is what you work for. And those moments are what you really truly work for, is that
Yeah.
ability to just not give a damn and just go. That was phenomenal.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah.
So what exciting goals are left?
I had always wanted a Porsche 911, and I checked that box. And I like, from a car perspective, I'm really happy. From a like a places that we live perspective, I'm happy. The big one now is retirement, and the way that I see retirement as nothing work related on my calendar, like that I can do whatever I want whenever I want. I still want to work. Like, I love technology. I love SQL Server. It's just so cool. Other databases, all kinds. There's so many things that I would love to learn and get really good at. But at the same time, I'm like, I want to do it because I want to do it when I want to do it, without having to be at this place at this time, just so that we can run around the world and do it on our own time. We're gradually inching there. So the big goal for this year was to be 50% somewhere else in the world, and then 50% back at home with a regular home studio and all that.
Yeah.
And we nailed that. We're now, it looks like, somewhere between 6 months and 9 months that we're going to be in Iceland. But probably 2 years from now, I want to have nothing on my calendar at all. And that will be another big, that'll be like the passive income thing, where I can just say, all right, this was incredibly hard now, but here we are.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool. So actually, I have an interesting question from Adam. I asked people on Twitter, right? What do you want to ask Brent? And he asked,
Mhm.
how hard was the transition for working and streaming in your studio in San Diego, and then moving to Iceland and doing it all from there?
Yeah. Thank goodness. So there were a few things along the way. It was hard to get the visa process. As Americans, we can be tourists anywhere. Working in other places is a whole lot harder, and we still have to pay full taxes back in America, which is different than any other country in the world. It doesn't matter where we are; we have to pay full taxes in America as
I,
if we were home.
I gave up my green
So
card because of that.
it's a pain in the rear. It's so expensive. People in America go, "Oh, European taxes are so high," and I'm like, "Well, hello, you wherever you are in the world, you have to pay." Um, So that was figuring out the visa logistics and the paperwork was a big, huge chunk. And it's not like I got around the taxes. Like we still have to pay taxes back in the US. But so that was one chunk. The next chunk was how do we find a place with bulletproof high speed internet? Because the internet cannot go down. And Iceland's really nice in that way, in that something like 90% of all houses have a fiber or can get fiber if they just ask for it. And it's like $40 US a month here for 1 gig fiber. So we're in the middle of nowhere. And I'm like 40 minutes from a good grocery store, and it's still fiber internet. There's like my nearest neighbor is like probably a quarter mile away, and we still have just amazing high speed internet. So that made it way easier.
Yeah.
The time zone thing would have made it a whole lot tougher, except that we timed it so that we could be here when the days are practically 24 hours. So the sun sets now at like 11 p.m. and rises again at 3 in the morning. So that makes it so much easier because now I can just wake up and go to sleep on my own schedules. It's still weird, like trying to make the things work on US time. I'll wake up at 4 a.m. here in Iceland, do things for like 6 hours, take a nap, and then the US business day starts. So that's kind of oddball, but it's also easier. But most of people here in Iceland speak English. Nothing's written in English. And like the phone messages, like if you call someplace, they're immediately it's just all Icelandic on recorded messages. It makes it a little trickier. And Icelandic has nothing to do with any other language that I would know from
Yeah.
America. But it was not too bad at all. And the Icelandic government did everything that they could to make it easy. I could not believe how friendly and approachable the government was. Just like I would get one main contact person and they'd keep in touch with me and make sure everything was going smoothly. So I can't say enough for Iceland for making this easier.
That's pretty cool. So you're thinking about staying there and then like multiple places?
We're here. The original plan was we were going to be here for 6 months, and we were in this exact house for 3 months, and then we have an apartment in Reykjavik for the rest of the time, and we're going around the country. We're like 2 weeks on, and then 2 to 3 weeks off, traveling the country, seeing different stuff. Um, so we're all over the place in hotels, just seeing sights, and I don't want to say camping because we're not those kinds of people, but we go all over the place, Airbnbs, whatever. And we were really mesmerized at the thought of buying a house here, because they'll let you. You have to jump through some hoops, and you can build a vacation house here. And I'm like, it would be amazing if I'm disconnected anyway. Except one thing that we found out recently in the spring, the smell of horse poop is unreal. We're out
Oh
in the
wow.
country, and we love the country and the huge mountains and everything around us. But the smell of poop and the flies, wah! So I'm like, well, if we bought a house here, it would have to be seasonal. Like we would only be here certain times a month. But it's that's the otherwise. Other than that, we would probably be here half the year and back in the U.S. half the year. We still may come here half the year. We just got to be real careful about which half of the year it is.
Yeah, yeah, no horse poop.
Yes. Oh, spectacular.
Yeah,
I
I
love
mean it's pretty
horses. I mean, they're
cool.
beautiful, but
So you have snow and you have sun in San Diego. I mean, I always see you sitting on your balcony and looking out over the nice water and the
yes.
drives with the car. So I mean,
Yes.
it's the ultimate combination.
Oh, my wife, strangely, is from El Salvador, and she loves the winter. She grew up in El Salvador, and then after that, she was in southern Texas, and she loves the winter, loves the ice and snow and hot chocolate and all those kinds of things. And I grew up in West Michigan, spent a lot of time in West
Yeah,
Michigan, and I didn't ever need to see snow again. But now we have this nice balance. Before this, it was like sometime in Colorado, and then most of our time in California. And now it's back and forth between these two. And the snow's gorgeous to look at here. When it's out on mountains, and we don't go mountain climbing by any means, or we don't even do skiing. But it's just gorgeous to look at. It's inspirational, epic. It's like living in a Ansel Adams picture.
awesome, awesome. All right, so let's talk about SQL Server too.
Deal.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not following it. I mean, the last time I was really doing SQL Server was SQL Server 2008 R2. I mean, of
Oh
course, I've been
yeah,
following
yeah.
it along, but that was when I was really doing some data warehousing stuff. What's the current state of SQL Server? Where are we?
The best way that I would describe it is mature, especially because I split like half my time in SQL Server, half my time in Postgres these days. Um, I'm always so happy when I read news about other databases and the features they're just now getting. And I'm like, oh, SQL Server's had that for a really long time. I kind of take that for granted. I assume that, everybody's got these things or things that people struggle with. And I'm like, oh, I don't even actually have to worry about that at all in SQL Server. So this is going to sound really weird, but if Microsoft never brought out another version of SQL Server, I'd actually be okay with this. It's really good. I know people always have their wish lists of things. I want a pony, I want self-managing, whatever. And I'm like, man, this product is really good. Sure, there are some pitfalls here and there. There are things that I wish would be improved. But as opposed to when you look at so much NoSQL platforms out there and how rapidly those things are having to evolve to get even the most basic things that we take for granted in SQL Server, if I had to pick one word to describe SQL Server right now, mature would totally be it.
Mm, nice.
If I had to pick one other one or another phrase, it would probably be enterprise ready. Because I look at some of the stuff that some of the NoSQL platforms do, and I'm like, oh my God, like you can't log query, you can't log who's seeing what. You can what do you mean you can't set like fine-grained access permissions as to who's allowed to see what? So the we're just so lucky that how enterprise ready SQL Server is, as opposed to a lot of the more junior solutions out there.
Yeah. And actually, I remember, I mean, it went pretty quickly. I think the first SQL Server I did was SQL Server 6.0 or something.
Ooh,
And
yeah.
from there to where we are today in 2008 or two, it's actually not that much time, but there's so much was added and so much was done in these days. So,
It's
so, so
still
maybe not.
Yeah,
So,
every version, it's ridiculous how large the feature list becomes, how quickly. And I'll see people say, "Well, I want end-to-end training on SQL Server." I'm like, "No, you don't. You're never using half of this. It takes teams of people to use all these features."
yeah, yeah. Actually, we'll get to that. Um, so so how much cloud traction do you see?
There's really two ways. So obviously there's infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. DBAs or companies with DBAs, I should say it that way. Companies with DBAs prefer infrastructure as a service because they got all these complex, I want a pony kind of scenarios. Then companies with only developers or groups of developers, people doing startup apps, they prefer platform as a service. The people who are, goodness, evidently I'm allergic to the cloud today. The people who do platform as a service, they're just go, go, go. They have been going for a long time. I think that developers who want to build a new data solution or build something data related or that needs a data backend, if you're not selling into the enterprise, you'd be an idiot for using anything other than platform as a service. The longer you can go without hiring a DBA, go. It's so much easier on platforms as a service where they just manage everything for you. Infrastructure as a service or companies large enough to hire DBAs, they're so much more conservative and there's so many moving parts that it's been a lot slower. And now everybody's just doing lift and shifts. They're just trying to lift everything directly into AWS, Azure, Google, whoever the platform is.
Yeah.
And if you're just doing lift and shift, it doesn't really matter where you go. You really need to think more long term about who has the features and platform as a service that you want to be able to use. And so that's where a lot of the enterprises are still at, is trying to figure out where they want to do long-term partnerships with. So I see a lot of big companies in my line of work, because by the time you have to hire somebody like me who's an emergency surgeon, you already have to be feeling the pain pretty bad. You have to be feeling pretty bad performance pains. Nobody calls me when they're just getting started going, hey, how can I hire an expensive expert to do proactive planning? That doesn't work. So they
Shoot.
tend to, yeah. What could go wrong? These guns look amazing. So I saw it a lot when people went in with both feet and then they kind of backed out a little. Now I'm seeing it more as just people went in and now how do I dial my bill down? How can I make it cheaper? Sure, they want to make it faster, but they also want to make their hosting costs go down.
Interesting. So maybe let's you kind of mentioned it already, but so let's say I'm gonna go use Pass. I don't need a DBA anymore.
You don't at small scale. And by small scale, I'm going to say, instead of most people think data sizes or core counts or whatever, I'm going to say bill size. You don't really need a database administrator until you're spending at least, let's say, $100,000 a month on your data. If you're spending $100,000 a month on a data, it's on whether it's Azure SQL DB, whether it's Azure SQL DB hyperscale managed instances, Cosmos DB, whatever it is. That's going to sound insane to readers who or to listeners who aren't doing it yet, but to companies that happens a lot. And when you're spending $100,000 a month, all of a sudden it becomes much more sensible to say, hey, we could have a full-time employee in here who just focuses on making things fast without just turning up the dial on the volume. Sooner or later, you hit a point when you're spending that much money where it makes more sense to have the full-time employee involved. But until then, if you're doing platform as a service, every now and then I'll get a sales call from somebody who's doing platform as a service that they're doing Azure SQL DB or whatever, and I see them spending like $500 a month. I'm like, just double your spend, and that sounds terrible for a consultant to say, but you could double your spend, and it's going to be less than hiring a human being to get involved. Just go double the spend. It's going to be another $6,000 a year. Who cares? Just go do that. And so it's really when the money piles up that you start to bring in a full-time human being.
Interesting.
And I should say their duties are so different because you don't need someone managing backups. You kind of want somebody managing security, but it doesn't need to be a database administrator in order to do it. Same thing with restores, provisioning. That's so much easier for a developer to do now. Database work is much more turning towards the performance angle of things.
All right. So maybe that's another interesting question. So one side we have DBAs, but you're in the DBA. What is a DBA to you?
There have always been two roles for database administrators. People just kind of think DBA is DBA, default blame acceptor, does about anything. Like if it's related to a database, they would go and do it. And back in the 2005 days, that was true. In 2008 R2 comes out, that they have these specialized business intelligence tools. There's reporting services, integration services, analysis services. They start forking those off into separate roles. Well, so DBA still inherited. If it's involved with the engine, they must be responsible for doing it. And it eventually segues. Remember the $100,000 a month spend number. When you're spending that much money, there's really two sets of job duties. One is making sure the server runs. They're taking backups, they're configuring the cluster, they're provisioning new SQL servers, they're troubleshooting it when it doesn't start, they're working with Microsoft on support calls when they have issues, they're patching a wheel that never goes away. And that is still true. And those people are learning PowerShell, learning Windows clustering, they're learning Kubernetes, they're learning Linux, things that are really system related. The other tack is performance tuning, is what I would call development database administrators, working with developers, performance tuners, trying to go, how can I make this pig fly as fast as possible while spending as little as possible? And so that's a totally separate role because they're learning T-SQL, indexes, execution plans, wait stats, DMVs. They're working inside the engine, but they have no idea what to do when the cluster goes down. So those are really two separate roles. I know people who go, oh, I do both of those. No, you suck at both of those. And you can get away with that when the spend involved is relatively low. But by the time you get up to $100,000 a month, people are doing complex stuff. They're doing clustering. They're doing geo redundancy. They're trying to do very challenging query-based stuff. And you can't suck at everything when you're spending $100,000 a month on something.
Yeah, makes total sense. So, and I think maybe the other interesting question is, so when I started out in 2000 writing ASP, and we would write SQL Server statements, and we would write SQL statements. But these days, developers, they don't write SQL statements anymore, right?
Yeah.
They want to get as far away as they can from it. What is
I don't blame them.
What is that? Yeah, but what does that mean, and how does it, like, it has consequences, right?
I know a lot of DBAs are very anti entity framework and Hibernate Dapper. Yeah. They're very against developers using the tooling to write queries for them. And I know a lot of database administrators, if you gave them a magic wand, they would say, from now on, everyone will only write T-SQL. They will interact directly with the database. But I'm like, if you just magically mandate them, it's not like they're going to be good at it. It's not like you can take an untrained person and say, from now on, when you're ordering at a restaurant, you will only speak French. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
So I love Entity Framework and Hibernate, Dapper, all the ORMs, not as some sarcastic consultant answer to go, they make a great living because they do crappy queries. No, humans do crappy queries too. The reason I like those things is they help the business scale like crazy. We don't get paid as developers and database administrators unless people are shipping features. They have to give things that are valuable to end users before we can actually get paid. So I wish that more folks knew SQL. They don't have to be good at it, but I wish that more folks knew it because it pays off long term in your career. It's a language that is just not going away. It's evergreen. It keeps showing up in more and more tools. Even the NoSQL wave that came out, all of a sudden those tools are backpedaling, going, actually, it means not only SQL. Yeah, okay, sure, buddy. That's not what you said when it came out. But it's as a database administrator, I love those kinds of tools because they help us all build stuff and get paid quicker.
Yeah, makes total sense. So maybe another, I think probably this is a bit up your alley too, but
Mhm.
I am a how should I say it? I want to learn SQL. Of course, I can come to your
Yeah.
website, but I'm a I'm a developer and a DBA. Are there two different things available, or is it just one training? If you know what I mean.
Yeah, yeah. No, if you're going to learn SQL, don't learn a vendor specific version of SQL Server. Go get the book SQL for Dummies. It's probably in like its 40th edition now. I have no idea who the author is. I haven't read it in 20 years. But the beauty of books like that, either SQL for Dummies or go find something similar, is you should learn a flavor that isn't specific to any particular vendor, because in your line of work as a data professional, whether you're a developer or a database administrator, you're going to be working with a huge number of tools throughout the course of your career. You're going to be working with Power BI. You're going to be working with reporting tools. You're going to be working with Excel. And SQL is like the lowest common denominator that if you learn the basics, it works across everywhere. And it's gotten better. There's all kinds of tools that have been added to the language. You can pick up a book from 20 years ago for $10 and you can learn a whole lot. That you'll
Yeah.
learn a lot enough to be good. You shouldn't pay more than $20 in order to learn SQL because it is such an industry mature tool and it's just easily available out there. For the only people who should come to my stuff in terms of my training, you can come to the blog. It's all for free. My How to Think Like the Engine training is the first class that I would suggest anybody goes to. It's totally free and teaches you how the internals of SQL Server Engine works in a way that matters to you when you're writing queries. But you shouldn't come to my classes until you're having performance problems. I don't want to teach you how to write the queries. You should be coming here only when you have performance problems and you need to make this pig fly faster. And I would say the same thing to anybody on any platform. Go pick up a 20-year-old book on the platform first, and you're going to be fine learning the basics.
Not on Power BI.
Not on Power BI, yes, which is also why I don't do training on Power BI, because as a trainer, I have to be able to build training that will last for years, that I can
Yeah.
keep continuing to sell for 2, 3, 4 years. As soon as I started using Power BI as a consumer, because I love it as a consumer, as soon as I started using it and I see the monthly release cadence, how fast things change, and the thing that made sense to do 6 months ago isn't the way that you do it today. I was like, why don't I leave that over here? In terms of writing training for it, I'm not going there here for me, but it's a phenomenal product. I love seeing the rapid advancement, but that you can't pick up a 1-year-old book on Power BI and have it be as meaningful as going to YouTube, hearing podcasts, things that are current.
Yeah, makes sense. So maybe a slightly different question, because one of the reasons why I do this podcast too is because I also want to learn.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we also hear a lot of things about Synapse, BigQuery, all the other tools that
yeah,
are out there about it. How are they different
yeah.
than SQL Server? And actually, do you need them really in the same
Oh,
way?
yes. The way where SQL Server excels, and I'm going to make a broad sweeping generalization, and lots of people are going to get pissed off, and I just don't really care. But where you need SQL Server is if you measure your queries in milliseconds. Where you need some other tool is where you're comfortable measuring seconds or tens of seconds in order to get the answer that you want, and you never ask the same question twice. So SQL Server, when you define relationships, you define tables, you're and you write very tightly coded stored procedures and you do code an entity framework, you're building something that's repeatable and cookie cutter, and it can be on the homepage of your website and things will respond in milliseconds. But if you go, I have no idea what data I'm going to collect. It's going to change all the time. I can't go through business processes to define it. And I want to be able to ask lots of different questions all the time. Oh, the cloud is phenomenal. Synapse, all the things that when the Cousteau queries, the things that empower analysts to work on their own. And I kind of think of it as the people who used to be analysts used to be able to do it in Excel, and you would never bring a database involved in that. You would never bring a database administrator. You would never tell them they had to do it on a server. But the amount of data that's available now is just so huge that I kind of think of all these big data tools as the new equivalent to Excel. The people are going to do all kinds of wild and crazy ideas for things. And you want to be able to let them slide a credit card and temporarily access huge amounts of computing power without having to spin up a whole rigid defined SQL server and declare how all their data types are. So a great example of one of them, one of the clients that I worked with had 20 people, 20 data analysts on their team who were learning things like R and Python or whatever, and they never expected to put any of it into some kind of production process. They just had a lot of people asking really smart questions of the data, and the amount of data that they had and the forms of data that they had changed every 2 weeks. They kept discovering more kinds of data in the company, and they were just laying it out. Tools like Synapse help you be so much more agile than a more rigidly defined tool like SQL Server would be.
Makes sense. But they are very different, right, than SQL. Like you don't manage them the same.
Totally. I'm a good example of that, in that I don't touch Synapse with a 10-foot pole. Like, I'm massively interested in it. I love learning about ways that people use different tools to solve problems. But every management tool that you use is different. The way you review performance issues is different. You really just think of them as different databases that happen to be produced by the same company. Sure, they have some of the similar code involved, but they are just totally different, totally different
Actually,
products.
it has
Wildly.
analysis services code in it. You know that?
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah. The whole Vertipack thing and all that. Yeah. But I
Yeah.
still just like kind of look at it and I go, wow, oh, that's kind of amazing. But do I know how any of it works? No. I just like reading.
No, I don't know if you any chance listened to the one I did with Amir Nets, but he was telling us how it came to be, like sitting in his underwear in the kitchen, building the Vertipack engine. It's
Jeez.
pretty amazing. Like a genius mind just cranks out something like that, and then yeah.
Not only is he a genius, he's such an incredible communicator. He's fun to listen to and can
Oh yeah,
convey ideas. Because I say any, there are all kinds of geniuses who sketch things out in their underwear in the kitchen on napkins, but most of them don't get built into billion-dollar products. So
yeah,
you
exactly.
got to be able to communicate and evangelize, and he's a whiz there.
Definitely. So maybe another question is, so let's say I would build a data warehouse, and these days now it's a bit like questionable of how would I build it? Like would I use Synapse or BigQuery and Snowflake and all of these tools, or SQL Server? What would be some rationale?
Boy, again, this is going to get me in trouble for the
Uh,
audience because people are going to say I'm crazy. But the thing that's
I mean,
good about SQL Server is the huge amount of compatibility. Like, you can throw any kind of reporting tool in there, and every reporting tool on the planet is going to be able to connect to SQL Server. Sure, there's probably some open source ones in a basement somewhere that don't connect into SQL Server. They're like, only open source, but almost anything that you would buy enterprise ready is so ingrained with SQL Server. And enterprises are so used to doing SQL Server on premises at large scale. So that's pretty easy. The thing is, though, I would say for data warehouses, the reason why I would lean towards cloud based services is that the scale goes up and down all the time. The people have all these weird projects that they want to tackle on different time scales. And it's not cheap to change SQL Server scale a lot. Oh, sure, technically you can do it with stuff like managed instances, Azure SQL DB, whatever. But there's still planning that's involved with that and scaling it up and
yeah,
down. Whereas these cloud services, Synapse Analytics, all these things are so much easier to scale up and down in brief periods and only pay for what you need when you need it. And SQL Server just isn't there. I think when you get to those scales of data, again, especially when time for queries is expected to run in seconds to tens of seconds to even minutes, if it's a one off data analyst type query, then cloud services make so much more sense.
So do you ever get involved too with like data warehouses? Like,
Oh,
because I feel like it's
oh,
a different ballgame, right? Like
it
if you have
is.
a
It is.
operational database or a data warehouse.
It's fairly rare. It's much because I've specialized so much into the emergency room surgeon type approach for SQL Server. Almost all of my work comes from people who measure their queries in milliseconds, but they're taking seconds.
Mm,
And so it's fairly rare these days. How I got my start, database administration, was much more with data warehouses, but I just gradually just ended up focusing just through luck of the draw. Probably with my work with Stack Overflow, got me enough fame with the high volume transactional type stuff that most of my
yeah,
clients these days are just website related or small transactional software vendor type stuff.
that makes sense. So maybe I mean we kind of already talked about it, but how do you see this going? The big data versus relational? Because now we hear this more and more from our side too in the Power BI. Like, okay, let's just
Mhm.
put everything into files in the lake and then query it. Be done with it.
Mhm. The problem still always comes back to how do you make it respond in milliseconds? And so there's this thing where operationally companies will have a website, a production line, something where customer service reps are looking at things, customers are looking at an order status screen, and it has to be within milliseconds as you start to scale. Business processes that are very well defined, that don't change very often, that ends up in a relational database. How you ask questions of it becomes interesting because if you want to ask questions of that operational system that's pretty well defined and it's not changing all that much, you just hook up a reporting tool to it and you just run queries against it. But data warehousing took off because we want to run queries against that, plus join it to all kinds of other things. And we don't want to piss off people who are running the operational system, the one that actually fronts the customer website. And for a long time, those servers were so small and computing was so expensive that we couldn't run reports against them. And you can't run your report in production, it takes too long. So there's always this push pull of people want instant results showing the sales as of right now. They don't want to see the sales from, don't show me yesterday, it's too late. I need to figure out how I'm going to change my ad, design strategy for Google or whatever. Um, so that there's always going to be both of those, but I
Yeah.
think that the nice thing about all of the cool big data tools that are out there now is it just makes it easier and easier progressively to take what's in the operational system and dump it out, and then you can join it to all kinds of other stuff with all these ad hoc tools. But if you're out there listening and you're a database administrator who does the day-to-day millisecond query response times, your job is safe. That stuff's not ending up in files anytime soon because the latency is just too slow.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. Okay, so maybe I had this question for a little bit later on, but I'm going to ask it now. Power BI and direct query. Have you come across any of it yet? Because we see this a lot too with customers like, oh, we have this data sitting in the lake. And again, I mean, we have customers tell us we're spoiled by importing data into Power BI. It's so fast and we don't have to do anything. We just import it and it's super fast. And you talk about milliseconds, but they want to say have the same when they query terabytes of data sitting in the lake. And then they get into trouble. Have you seen any of it? Have you
I'm
gotten?
I'm personally a great example of it. So what I use Power BI for is we have this product called Constant Care that gets diagnostic data from thousands of SQL servers around the world, and it's about 2 terabytes worth of data. And I'm only keeping 30 days. Like it's only 30 days worth of diagnostic data, and yet it's already 2 terabytes. I can't get that in Power BI. It doesn't work. It also, to make matters more frustrating, it's in Postgres. It's in AWS Aurora Postgres. I need direct query and it doesn't work. We don't have direct query for Postgres yet. I'm probably one of those cases where I'm like, I can't wait to have it. I'm really looking
Mhm.
forward to it because I want to use the reporting tool that I love, Power BI. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on the podcast. I'm like, I'm a huge believer in it as a reporting tool. I want to use that tool, but I need to be able to use direct query because I have data sources that I'm not going to be able to dump out to files quickly enough, not in a way that's going to be meaningful to me. Um, So I want it desperately whenever I get to the point where I had it. If my backend was SQL Server, I would be using it today. Instead, what I have to do is pull out a subset of the data and process it that way in Power BI. But I'm looking forward to it. And it's given the rate of change in Power BI, I'm sure it's just a matter of time.
Yeah.
I hope
Maybe
it's
I don't
just a
know.
matter of
I don't
time.
even know.
Yeah.
But
No, and I wouldn't expect you to answer that. Yes.
yeah. But I think yeah. So that's interesting. So maybe one more question. You kind of already touched on it, but NoSQL. I mean, there was a time when they said, "Oh, let's all just jump JSON files into a database, and that's it." Where
Yes.
are we?
It's huge. I think it's massive. It just ended up taking things that never should have been in a relational database to begin with. We're another great example of that is I have this product called Paste the Plan, where the public can paste execution plans into their browser, and then they can get a link that they can share with other people to help them work on the same problem. It's not in a relational database because I don't need a relational database. I just need to know where's the file and like a key value kind of thing to it. So we use a key value database. It's get the beauty of NoSQL is it's taking so much of things that never should have been in a relational database to begin with. If you don't use a join, don't put it in a relational database. If all you want is give me this key, give me a value back, or give
Mhm.
me this file back, go put it on a flat file somewhere. Go use a much less structured data solution. That works great. So I'm thrilled with it. I know some people will say you should use SQL Server for everything. It can store files and images. No, go use a file server. Go use a document database. And they're so cheap. If you're going to store documents, why would you not use an Azure service that just stores documents? It's
Yeah,
so cheap compared to our crazy relational databases.
but it's cheap for a reason. So
Yes. Yeah, you can't do joins. There are all kinds of things you can't do very well. If I wanted to run reports against all the plans inside Pace the Plan, I couldn't do it. There's much less fine grained access control. There are all kinds of things that you don't get trending. But if you can live with that subset of stuff, it's pennies as opposed to the thousands of dollars that we have with a relational database.
yeah, makes sense. So where do you see SQL go in the next couple of years? I mean, this is an interesting question too.
So here comes from no inside perspective. Obviously, I don't work for Microsoft. I don't have any like NDA related things with this, but so many people from Microsoft have been banging the Kubernetes drum for a really long time that the way that we do it's funny for me to even say this, the way that we do high availability and disaster recovery in SQL Server is kind of awesome because we have so many technologies. It's also kind of crappy because we have so many technologies and they're not super easy to administer,
Yeah.
which I just kind of laugh at because I look at my friends who work in MySQL and Postgres and they really struggle. Like I look at the tools and I'm like, you're still rubbing sticks together to do that. But for the last couple few years, Microsoft has been banging the Kubernetes drum, and it was really clear that we were moving towards things like availability groups in Kubernetes, which would be hard in the short term because nobody knows Kubernetes and it's evolving at the same rate as like Power BI is. It's going to be difficult in the short term, but it'll be a better thing in the long term if everything with Kubernetes works out the way that we would hope that it would work out. So I think it feels like Microsoft's in this period when they're having to invest a lot in the high availability and disaster recovery side of it, and that market is about to shift dramatically. Like the knowledge that you have to have in order to run it. But the other thing that is also kind of awesome at the same time is that companies are now starting to have more applications that they built cloud native, where you just don't have
Yeah.
to worry as much about backup. And do you still have to worry? Sure, but you don't have to worry as much about things like backup, recovery, uptime because the vendors manage more of it for you. But we do have to worry much more about query performance because if one query goes haywire, then all of a sudden it basically takes the system down. So Microsoft has also been investing so much in the intelligent query processing stuff that our skills have to change in order to keep up with. So I think it's just at an interesting point in time where so much is changing. The high availability and disaster recovery is changing. The way that we manage performance is changing. it's funny for me to have said at the beginning of the call, 2019 is mature. I would be fine coasting with this for like the next 10 years, but we're about to see a whole nother set of rapid evolution take place in databases, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, I totally get. And then yeah, the bigger scale, that's also an interesting problem. I mean, I can kind of see it, and I'm trying to get him on my podcast too. It's the guy who actually runs Power BI as a service.
Mm.
And,
Mhm,
like that would be very interesting to hear. But I kind of hear the stories, because I mean we use SQL Server too and Power BI in
mhm,
the backend, and
mhm.
we see how this goes and it runs and the Kubernetes and all of these things. It's, I mean, it's, for me it's a bit too much almost, but
Yeah,
yeah, things change
well, it's like
rapidly.
the yes, and some things change and some things are totally different. Like 20 years ago, when I was working with databases, you had to know about things like RAID cards and the speeds of different Ethernet interfaces. You had to know things like
Yeah,
much more about things like DNS and the configuration files, the config type stuff that we had to deal with. 32 gig versus or 32-bit versus 64-bit. The things that you have to learn change a lot over the decades, but it's still not like robots are managing this stuff for us. It's still, we all just have such a bright future in having to turn all these dials and get all these things to work right. Because by default, a lot of this stuff works fine when you're spending less than 100 grand a month. Again, if you're just installing one SQL server and letting it sit in the corner, one VM, that's fine. But when you get to scale, that's when things start to become really challenging.
yeah, and actually we had the same with Power BI. We have a DBA too in the team, like who's
I believe it.
tuning all these queries and things that they're doing. And also, it's very interesting to see like how much gain you can have by all these new technologies. Like if you just
Mhm.
re-platform a little bit, how much money you can save. Like it's
Yes.
insane for any of these organizations to be able to do that.
Yes, which is also why that so much of us have really bright futures still is that if you don't do it right, all this stuff is expensive as hell. It was always expensive before, like building whole data centers out. But once you built a data center or you provisioned a SQL server, if you lowered your performance overhead, you didn't get a savings the next month. You still have that data center, you still have a server sitting right there. It was what it was.
Yeah.
But now human beings can demonstrate a real ROI. If I look at somebody's server size and I go, oh, I can cut that in, by 2/3 if I do this, and this, then they're like, shut up and take my money. Come on, let's do this.
Yeah, it's same with Power BI or analysis services. Like people just say, okay, I'm just gonna point and click to that table in SQL Server and import everything over, and then
Yes.
yeah. But if you just are a little bit like thinking about what you're doing, and then you can like really save money and
Mhm.
and size and processing and all of these things.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, that's the same what I feel about like the potential with direct query is that I can get enough data just summarized out and make it work in Power BI. But the whole direct query's ability to go, oh, now I need one specific thing about this customer and about their environment. And if I can go get that directly, oh, like that would be a huge savings in terms of my processing time and my ability to do cool things with the reports.
well, I would say stay tuned for later this week in MBAS. Is this, lots of things are going to happen
Oh, good. Oh,
in
good.
this area. So I mean, it's it makes sense. Everyone wants to be able to get quick access to their data, and their analyst needs to get quick
Mhm.
access to the data. But you don't necessarily want to spin up Azure and write queries. They want a nice, friendly UI tool where I can just drag and drop. But it's not that easy, and
Yeah.
lots of
Yeah.
stuff needs to happen. So, so maybe, I mean, we're almost there at the end. One of the questions that I want to ask you too is, um, so let's say I'm working with SQL Server today.
Mhm,
What
mhm.
is one thing that you would recommend people to do or to learn,
And
and
and I
where?
would say this, whether you're working with SQL Server or something else, I would say the single most important thing you can do for yourself, your career, especially in this day and age where a lot of us are working from home, where our work hours are dragging on, we're feeling much more chained to our phones. The single most important thing that you can do is go put together a website with your name on it. Just initially, just put your resume or something out there, but start giving back to the community with whatever it is that you've learned. The thing that's holding you back, not you, but the audience, the thing that's holding you back isn't technical skills. If you're listening to podcasts like this, you're already fine on the technical front. What you need is a personal brand. You need to have your website out there. It doesn't have to be fancy. Believe me, if you go back and look at the time machine at mine, it's horrific, from when I got started. But put together just a basic website with your name on it and try to blog once a month. Just start with once a month. Your goal isn't to get readers. Your goal is so that the next time that you need a job and you hand someone your resume and your blog, your URL is at the top. Oh, what you have there is a history of the things that you've been working on and learning over time
Yeah.
and a track record of being able to communicate that to the public. All it takes is one search result. When you hand someone your resume, if they go search for your name and they see you and your post, you are miles ahead of all these people who haven't been giving back. Oh, sure, if you give back, all kinds of other great things are going to happen long term if you invest in yourself and the work that you do with it. But just pick one day and go, you know what? Today I am quitting work at 4 p.m. or whatever early time it is. I'm going to go get a blog with my name on it. It costs you $20 and go get it with wordpress.com.
Yeah.
And then start from there. Do it with your own domain name. It should be your name and something that you're interested in. Don't put it on, brentozar.wordpress.com. Have it be your name. It's going to cost you $10 extra. It's totally worth it. And over the years, it snowballs. If you start to put more time into it, it'll snowball into something that pays off much more than spending that same time learning a new technology ever would.
Yeah. And it's why I'm at Microsoft. This is exactly how it went.
Exactly.
So it's
Exactly.
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I mean, it's so great. Like you have these conversations and you learn about things, and by doing these things, you get like people reading your like. I remember in 2009. I mean, I was started blogging in 2008 or something, talking about
Mhm,
SSRS and SSIS and things like this. A little bit of SQL,
mhm.
but not too much. And then I started doing Gemini. And at one point, Amir Net started answering or
Wow.
putting some comments into. And I was like, "Holy shit, Amir Net is
Yes.
like what happened?"
Mhm.
And then yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it kind of went from there.
It's so
It's
especially true when you work with these cutting edge things. So like Mohammed Darab, who's working with big data clusters, is he the guy doing it. So if you're anybody who's managing the product inside Microsoft is going to search and they're going to find you and they're going to be interested in talking to you. And that seems weird to those of us who are on the outside and we just feel like we're babes in the woods. But the key to getting there is the giving back. It's not as much the learning as much as it is giving back exactly what you know. And it just rockets your career forward.
yeah, I mean, it definitely helps us well too. Like you can fulfill your curiosity, you can learn about things, you can play things around, you can teach others, and it's very fulfilling. I totally agree. I
Yes.
love it. This is why I'm doing this too. I mean, I learn from it, but also other people like
Yeah.
it. I mean, I've seen their comments saying, "Oh, it was helpful for me," and this, yeah, I mean,
Yes.
that's really really nice.
And this even thing that the podcast too is interesting for readers who are like or watchers who are like, are people are going to be interested in me? Everything's been said. Anything that I would blog about has already been said. What readers are also interested in is the personal side of you.
Mm,
They want your story. They want to know how you did it. And that if all they wanted was the pure technical details, they would read the documentation. No one reads the documentation, so that's
yeah,
why they want your personality on it.
yeah, that's great. So maybe the last thing, anything you want to share to the SQL community, recommendations, tips? I think you already given a great one.
That's a good one. I would say that the things you're so much smarter than what you think you are. The things that you've learned over the years, you should stop and give yourself credit for. Think back to the things that you used to have to search online for. All of us suffer from imposter syndrome, and we think that there are these things we have to learn next in order to be sharp.
Oh
But
yeah,
just don't forget to stop and make a list of here are the things that I've done so far in life that were challenging for me over time. Go back through through the photos on your phone. Think about the things that you used to search the web for. The search engines out there all have tools where you can go back and look at your own search history, which is hilarious for other reasons. But just hop back like 5 years and look at what you were searching for. And especially during times like this when we all feel like we're stressed out, burned out, working right at the edge, go back and take a moment to reflect on how far you've come, because especially if you're the kind of person who invests in yourself to listening to podcasts all the way till the end, then you're the kind of person who's probably doing a whole lot more than you give yourself credit for.
Yeah, makes total sense. Okay, so now the last question. Any plans yet to go travel or conferences or anything, or nothing yet? You
Yes, so not conferences. I'm still waiting to see whenever Sequel Bits announces an in-person one. I would probably, try to figure out how I want to do that. But the
yeah.
big thing, my wife and I just happened to be talking about what would be the trip that we would do when we're both vaccinated. And Bora Bora. We've always wanted to do an
Oh wow.
overwater bungalow in Bora
Yeah,
Bora. So to disconnect there for a couple of weeks, that's our next big goal.
that seems like an amazing idea that I should also do.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, hey, it's middle of nowhere. The internet's gonna suck, so it's truly represents a disconnecting type thing. But it's hard enough to get to that I would never even consider doing it until we were both vaccinated. So everybody go get your shots. We'll help
Yes,
get the world back to normal.
yes. I hope next month maybe for me. So that would be good.
Good
Then all
luck.
of Europe
Fingers
will start
crossed.
open up, and Brent, you can come to Netherlands and can hang out, drink a
Yeah.
beer.
Oh man, now that we're over here, now that the travel back and forth is so much over here, we're like, come on, vaccinations, come on, let's do it. Strangely, I'm eligible. Both my wife and I are eligible back in California, but for us to get it, we would have to fly back, quarantine, get them. The 2 week or the separation between the two shots. Wait another 2 weeks after until it was over, and we're like, we're not willing to go back just to do that. We're going to wait until we're both eligible here. Well, I'm eligible now, so I'm working with a doctor to get it now. But yeah, until we're both vaccinated, we're like, okay, we'll hold off on travel until then.
Makes sense. All right, Brent. I really want to thank you for your spending your time with me and talking about SQL Server and your Epic Life Quest. I really love following it and following you on Instagram and seeing all those amazing pictures. I mean, I really like
Thank you.
it's great to see someone who is very successful in the line of business, but also, no, I mean, it's true. I mean, everyone in
Thanks.
SQL
Thanks.
Server
Thanks.
world knows you
For better or worse. Yes.
no, but I mean,
Yes.
everyone, yeah.
No,
And
and
then,
I can't wait to see you again in person too, as well. But to get back in conferences and hug people again, I'm totally a hugger,
exactly.
so it's funny.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be good. Yeah. All right. So thank you for your time, and I'll talk to you in person.
My pleasure. See you again soon, man.
And that concludes another episode of Cast from BI. I hope you enjoyed it. I've learned a lot. If you like it, hit the like button. If you want to hear more, hit the subscribe button, whether it is on YouTube or on your favorite podcast channel. And with that, I will talk to you next time.